every argument you have with someone is basically this. Every single one of them. It's like, I'm right, no, I'm right. Wait a second. You're both right, or you're both wrong. Because this person sees a 9, this person sees a 6. It's all perspective. Okay, it's all perspective. My least favorite argument in the history of my life is when someone tells me what I said. Well, you said this. I'm like, no, I didn't. And then they go, yes, you did. And then I go, no, I didn't. And then they go, yes, you did. And then what do I say? I say, no, I didn't. And it goes on like that forever. Because there's no solution there. So a lot of times what I'll try and do is I'll be like, no, I accept that you heard that, but I don't know if I said that or not. I don't remember saying it. And then what do they say? But you said it. So they can't even let it go then. You give someone the opportunity to let something go, and then they don't, then things get really frustrating. Right? So understand when you get in an argument with somebody, or somebody does something to you, they probably see it completely different. They're probably like, this kid came up to me and did something rude and mean, and then I did it back to them. That's probably what they see. Probably. Right? Normally people just don't do things out of nowhere. So we think to ourselves, what might have happened? Because they maybe had a rough night of sleep the day before. All right, cool. So, we have a question and then we have a fill in the blank. You don't have to write down the whole fill in the blank. The question is, what is the difference between a primary and secondary source? We've talked about this before, you might remember. And this, when mestizos learned to act like a blank and did not celebrate or keep their own culture, they were given access to blank and included in society. So 2 words missing from here. And what is the difference between primary and secondary? Give you about a minute to do that. I forgot to stop the writing lesson, so that was the lead. If anyone needs it again, I'll redo it.
No había parado.
Yeah, it was like an hour and a half. I just deleted it. That's not important. What? I was talking about the writing lesson, like I forgot to stop recording. Just recording. Another 15 seconds. I mean, you just write down 2 words that you think. All right, so a primary source is a first-hand eyewitness account. Okay, this says this person was here. Okay, they saw something and they're going to communicate it. So that could be a notebook entry, like someone's journal or diary that they write in. Could be a picture that someone made, like a painting. Photograph, if they have access to photograph technology. Maybe even a map that was drawn, a letter that they wrote to someone else. These are primary sources. They were made in the moment. Okay? Now there's something called secondary sources. Those normally is someone interpreting a a primary source. So I look at this primary source, and then I write about my thoughts about this. I look at this source of this president's journals that he wrote. He kept track. He had a diary. So I read that, and then I write my thoughts about it. I'm creating now a secondary source. Yeah, secondary source. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. All right, so someone is creating something based off that primary source. So that's the big difference. So, an example. Let's say two of your friends have a fight out on the playground. You don't know anything about it. Your friend comes up and tells you exactly what happened. Your friend has now given a primary source, a first-hand account of what happened. Now, you've gotten all the information. So now you go and talk to someone else about it. You have now done second-hand information. More importantly, you've started to gossip, so don't gossip. but you did not see it. You are interpreting what someone else told you. Okay? And so that's one of those things that you have to understand. Anytime you look at something someone else did, they're using their own lenses, okay, with their own thoughts, what they did, and their own biases, okay, that affect what they're talking about. So a lot of times it's better for you to look at that primary source first. So, primary source, secondary source. Not sure. Primary, secondary, not sure. A diary entry from Anne Frank about her experience during the Holocaust. Is that a primary source, secondary source, or not sure? Let's check it. Everybody, thumbs up, thumbs down, or not sure. A diary entry from Anne Frank about her experience during the Holocaust. Is that primary source, secondary, not sure? She experienced it. It's her diary. That's a primary source. That's it. A biography of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, written in 2021. Primary, secondary, not sure. Secondary source. It's a biography. Probably interviewed people. There might be some parts that Gabriel talked about, but probably not, because I think he was dead at this point. Right? So anything that comes out after you died, most likely is a secondary source. Okay? You may have looked at old interviews of him, right? Him talking, and then got some information from him. Probably talked to people that knew him, looked at letters, read his books. What's that, Maxine? Secondary. A textbook chapter about the fight for independence from Spain. Is that primary, secondary? Secondary. That's the secondary. All textbooks are secondary sources, because they used a bunch of sources to write. Number 4, letters written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez for his wife. Is that a primary source, secondary source? Primary source. All right. So, we're going to keep looking at this idea of mestizaje, trying to figure out, are there perspectives missing? What are all the perspectives that we need to look at to understand? And maybe even learn just a little bit more about it. So, I'm going to go ahead and read the English part of it, the translation. So this is from an essay written by Jose Vasconcelos in 1925. All right, about his experience in Mexico. Is this primary or is this secondary? You're not sure. What do you think? An essay written by a man about something. It's a primary source. So this is a primary source. Now, this gets tricky. The translation you could argue is secondary because it could be translated wrong. But nevertheless, Spanish colonization created mestizaje. This marked his character, fixes his responsibility, and defines his future. What is he saying there? He's talking about this use of his. He's talking about someone who is a descendant, who is mestizaje. This idea of fixed things. So if you are one thing, you will always be that one thing. Okay? So that's what he's talking about. So fixes that, defines it. This idea that if I am not a certain way, I have no future. The only way I can have a future is if I'm this certain way. All right, that's what it means by permanent and fixing. The more white someone was, the more they were met with and helped economically. Economically means specifically with money, with wealth. So if you were someone who was poor but you looked white, they were more willing to help you out in your future. But if you didn't, they were not going to. This hurt the indigenous darker population more than an armed conflict. So in his opinion, he's saying that this idea of mestizaje actually was way worse for the indigenous population than actual armed conflict. Like it would have been better to have a fighting war and then you just have a truce afterwards and nothing else happens. But this idea of mestizaje, in this man's opinion, was horrifyingly bad for the indigenous population. What's that, man? He's a stretcher. All right, cool. All right, next one. So this is a research article in the 1990s. Primary or secondary? This is about the history of mestizaje, a research article in the 90s. Primary or secondary? This is a secondary source. So it says, La Nación Mestiza was a break with the Spanish colonial past. Big first sentence. What that means is that before this time frame, Spain didn't do this. They didn't mix with the indigenous populations. They had other power structures. It also separated from European and North American ideas that did not want races mixing with each other. This is what I was talking about when Maximo gets back. This is what I was talking about yesterday when we had these segregation laws in the United States. It was illegal, okay, for someone of African descent to marry someone from European descent in the United States. It was illegal. They did not want the races mixing. And so that's why sometimes people look at Mestizo and they're like, look at this wonderful thing that they did. He said, please, mix together. But that wasn't the whole story. Okay? It wasn't necessarily a celebration. It was something else. However, it kept power in the hands of lighter-skinned peoples. When mestizos learned to act like a European, so this was one of those fill in the blanks. So if a descendant of a Spanish conquistador and an indigenous person was able to show that they were European, what happened? They were given access to education and included in society. So if I was willing to abandon my past, okay, my indigenous people have these traditions, but I'm willing to ignore those and say, I don't recognize that part of my history. I am European and only European. Look at my color of my skin. I get educated and I get included in society. If I choose not to do that, I am not educated and I am kept out of society. What are you thinking about? Talk to your partner. What's going on in your head? Maybe I'll talk to you since it's not here. What do you think? What's going on here? Oh, right now, yeah. Well, thankfully, it's a big process right now, but I'm sure that there's still effects. All right, thank you, partner. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, partner.
All right, so last part, this meant only partial access for indigenous and black populations. So again, this idea of what do you have access to? Does the entire population of Nanajing have access to our school? No. Because it costs money. I believe it costs money to go to public school, doesn't it? In Colombia? It is free?
Yes,
Do you know?
yes, it's free.
Huh?
Like,
Right.
it's very.
Is that new? Because in the past, I know people still have to pay for stuff.
Yeah, it costs like very little.
So here we are, we're all kind of descendants of Europeans, and we still have access over. Do the indigenous population have access to the best education in Colombia? They do? Do we know? What about this, I don't know. If you think about the best schools in Colombia, are any of them public?
Or maybe yes.
Are any private institutions free for indigenous or people who are poor? So who has access to the best education in Colombia? People with money, people with privilege. Probably people who are descendants of Europeans. Has anything necessarily changed? Not necessarily. Things have gotten better, but have things changed? Whose responsibility is it to change stuff? It's the people in power. If the people in power don't change things, do you know what happens eventually? It might take hundreds of years, but at some point it goes away. If you don't know how to take care of power, take care of people, it eventually will leave you. Wealth disappears, everything. I mean, that's just how life is. So that's why we're learning about this stuff. It's not a drag. It's not to. It's to understand our place in this world and how we can make it better, and understand the past, what happens in our own country. This painting, primary or secondary? This painting. Primary or secondary? Just checking primary, secondary, not sure? Not sure. Why wouldn't you be sure? You would have to know the year it was painted, right? This was painted in the time of colonial conquest of the indigenous people. Does that change your mind? It should. So this is a primary source. All right? So now, can you see from where you are? Can you see what's going on here? Do you need me to try and zoom in? All right, so take a look. What do you think is going on? See if you can interpret this. Talk to your partner. What do you see? What are you thinking about? What's going on? What's going on in the painting? I'm taking your partner. Thanks, 3, 2, 1, 0. European, Spanish husband, indigenous or mestizo wife, 2 of their own children. Which child at this point is in the position of power? The white one. So they're not carrying the child, but they are having their eldest, darker skinned boy carry the child. Okay. So that's what's going on. Were you supposed to know what's going on? No. But that's why we're here to tell you. This was a style of painting. It was all about kind of celebrating this idea of trying to... What's funny? It's never a good idea to laugh about, I understand other stuff's happening. But when we're talking about race and privilege, all that stuff, and people are laughing, it makes people get a little... I understand you're not laughing. I'm just saying no one knows what you're laughing at, so then people assume things, and you don't want that. All right? All right. So at this point, we're going to try and use this sentence starter. Multiple perspectives are important in retelling history because today we saw that indigenous people were blank in the process of mestizaje. So what was the indigenous person's role in the process of mestizaje? How were they treated in the process of mestizaje? Check in with your partner, try and come up with 2 or 3 facts that you can enter. Or what? Oh, like the title of it? Or the side? Okay, I'll get back to that. Thank you. All right. All right, 3, 2, 1, 0. I did get interrupted. This type of painting was called pinturas de... Oh, man, I can't remember that word again. Casta. What's casta? C-A-S-T-A. Does that mean anything?
Spaghetti.
No, with a C. With a C. C-A-S-T-A. Does that mean anything? Casta?
What was the meaning? What celebrate?
This idea of mestizaje. So they thought, like, the people painting this wanted this idea to be very popular. Okay, that this was a very positive thing. So painting of descendants. Oh, that makes sense because these are descendants, right? You are descendants of your parents, of your of your grandparents, your great grandparents, your great grandparents, all back to the grandparent that we all share. Okay, we are descendants of the same people. Okay, we are human beings. So anyway, so they were celebrating this idea of races mixing together. Because again, if you think about it, compared to one that was keeping people separate, it seems like a pretty good deal. it seems like a celebration. Okay? But there was other stuff happening that wasn't that great.
Break.
I don't know why it works sometimes. Let's see if you got the answers to the question. This is what I will be looking for. Did you note the difference between a primary and a secondary source? And were you able to write down that if an indigenous or a mestizo person was able to show and pretend that they were European, they got access? And if they couldn't, they didn't. Those are the two big points. Okay, cool. I found a picture of it. Now, I don't talk about privilege and I don't talk about access to make anyone feel like guilty or bad. I don't think that's very useful. But I think a useful word or feeling that you could have is one of gratitude. Right? You look around and you're like, man, that's what I do every day of my life. I step outside my house and I'm like, good Lord, what did I ever do to really deserve any of this? And it's like, it gives you a chance to be thankful for what you have. Okay? And even if you're someone who sits in class all day going, man, this is awful, it could be worse. You could not have access to anything and just be kept ignorant your whole entire life. And that is a fate worse than most. Although then if you're super ignorant, you don't know it, and then maybe that's okay.
I like that in Germany.
What's that?
Like our character in Germany.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yesterday I was talking with my dad, like, because I felt like super stubborn in the class. So, wait,
You felt like what?